My name is Tura Sinclair, and I'm 32 years old. Just 2 hours before my sister's wedding, my mother placed my sister's bridal veil into my hands and calmly told me that I was the bride now. The wedding dress already fit me perfectly, of course it did. I spent half the night secretly sitting on the floor with a seam ripper, carefully altering it to fit my own body, while everyone else in the house was asleep. "Just sign the papers and smile," my mother whispered through the dressing room curtain. "He'll never know." She was wrong about nearly everything that happened that weekend, but the biggest mistake she made was believing he would never find out, because what my husband said to me on our wedding night was something no one in my family could have predicted, and what I chose to do the very next morning is exactly why my mother still tells people that I destroyed our family. Stay with me until the end, because once you hear everything, you can decide for yourself who really tore this family apart. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where the people who were supposed to protect you become the hardest chapter of your life, and where quiet women finally stop apologizing for surviving. If you've ever been the dependable one in your family, the person everyone relied on but rarely appreciated, then this story is for you. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from tonight, and don't forget to subscribe, because this ending is nothing like you're expecting. Now let me take you back to the small bridal shop where it all began. Sinclair Bridal had been standing on Main Street in Millbrook, Ohio. For 34 years, IT had a cream-colored awning, elegant gold lettering across the front, and display windows filled with headless mannequins dressed in beautiful white wedding gowns that M.Y. Mother Vivian built that business from the ground up that M.Y. Father Ree kept the steamers running, handled the equipment, and mostly stayed out of her way to a S for me. From the age of 14, I handled everything else. After school, I hemmed wedding gowns, AT night. I balanced the business books at our kitchen table. I learned that nervous brides usually stop crying if you gently hum while holding 3 sewing pins between your lips. I also learned that mothers of bride cry even harder if they happen to see the price tag. M.Y. younger sister, Brooke, never had to learn any of those lessons. She didn't need to. Brooke was the face of the business. Every spring, starting when she was just 6 years old, she modeled the newest wedding gowns in the front window, and people from all over town came just to watch her. Why Mother always pinned the weekend work schedule to the stockroom door. Looking back, that single sheet of paper explained exactly how our family worked. Brooke's name appeared beside fashion shows, photo shoots, and customer events. Mine filled every blank space. Inventory, alterations, deliveries, deposits out of a task came with applause. It belonged to Brooke. If it came with pressure and deadlines, it belonged to me. For years, I convinced myself that this was simply how family businesses operated, that someone had to create the beauty while someone else held everything together behind the scenes. That I was wrong. IT took me until I turned 32 to understand the truth. That I and my family, love was measured like numbers in an accounting book, that I just didn't realize which side of that ledger my name had been written on. Before I go any further, you need to understand the loan, because everything that happened afterwards started there 0.14 months before the wedding. My mother borrowed $180,000 to expand the bridal shop. She renovated the floors, ordered new inventory, and even added a second fitting suite that she proudly called a champagne room. The bank required collateral. The apartment above the shop wasn't valuable enough. SO1 Tuesday morning, my mother drove her own 83-year-old mother to the bank and convinced her to sign as the loan guarantor. Grandma Ruth put the only thing she owned at risk, the little blue house on Concord Street where she and I lived together, and O1 suggested she speak with an attorney first. I didn't even know it had happened until 3 weeks after the paperwork had already been signed. I had worked as a paralegal at Pell & Associates for 9 years. I knew exactly what it meant when an elderly person signed a personal guarantee while trusting their own daughter. I drove straight to the bridal shop and said exactly that. Standing right there in front of the display mannequins, M.Y. Mother brushed me off. She accused me of being dramatic and simply said, "Family doesn't charge interest." So I did the only thing I believe I could do. I made photocopies of every single document, the loan agreement, the guarantee, the disclosures, and the payment schedule. Then I stored those copies safely inside a folder in my desk drawer home. Later, I sat beside Grandma Ruth and gently asked if she would allow Mary Ann Pell to review the documents. She simply smiled, patted my hand, and quietly said, "No." She told me she could never take her own daughter to court. I understood why she felt that way. And somehow, understanding made it hurt even more. But before I closed the drawer, I made sure she remembered one simple sentence. If anything ever goes wrong, we have the paperwork. Grant Callahan arrived in Millbrook 18 months earlier, carrying both ambition and money. He was 38 years old, originally from Colorado, a self-made land developer who purchased the old Hollis orchard on the edge of town. The property included 60 acres of apple trees and an old farmhouse that he restored into his own home. He also transformed a large barn into a beautiful wedding venue. Before long, engaged couples from 3 different counties were booking their weddings beneath. The glowing string lights at his orchard, my mother saw Grant the same way a fisherman sees a pond full of fish. Within a month, she had invited him over for dinner. 7 months later, she had successfully guided him and Brooke from their first date at the orchard to an engagement ring with a diamond as large as a healthy grape. But while she was arranging their engagement, she was also working on another deal. She pitched Grant what she proudly called a business partnership. Sinclair Bridal would become the exclusive bridal concierge for every wedding held at his event barn. Wedding gowns, fittings, styling, and bridal services would all come through our shop. According to my mother, the only thing needed to make it happen was a family investment of $150,000. She mentioned that amount as casually as other people talked about the weather. I watched everything unfold from behind the shop counter with a handful of sewing pins in my hand. The only unexpected moment came during the engagement dinner. Grant leaned slightly past Brooke and quietly asked me, "Who actually runs the shop?" I answered honestly, "My mom is the one who brings customers through the front door. I'm the one who keeps everything running." Before I could even finish speaking, my mother's high heel pressed hard against my ankle beneath the dinner table. Grant didn't argue. He simply gave a slow nod, as if he were quietly storing that information for later, and I found myself thinking about that nod for a long time afterward. Eventually, I understood W.H. White. No one ever tells you what happens when you're the responsible sister. You end up planning your siblings' wedding whether anyone officially asks you to or not. Brooke had plenty of opinions about flowers. She had almost none about the planning, so naturally, every responsibility landed on me. I spread 180 guest names across my dining room table on sticky notes, carefully separating relatives who couldn't stand each other like someone trying to disarm a bomb. I organized every fitting appointment. When the florist accidentally delivered brown peonies instead of fresh ones, I handled the problem myself. Since the venue was Grant's orchard, I found myself sitting across, folding tables from him more often than my own sister did. Grant noticed little things. After hearing my coffee order only once, he remembered that I always noticed everyone else's. He drank his coffee black with 1 sugar. Remembering details like that had become second nature after years of working with brides and their families. During the food tasting, one of the buttons on his jacket popped off. Before the entrees were even served, I had already sewn it back into place using a small sewing kit I carried in my purse. It took less than 4 minutes. Both times, Grant thanked me with sincerity that made his words feel genuine. Meanwhile, Brooke showed up late to her own cake tasting and left before it was finished. When she tried on her wedding gown, my mother's masterpiece made from $10,000 worth of French lace, she stood in front of the mirror without the slightest smile. She never called it her wedding dress. She only called it the costume. "I want the costume tighter around the waist." "Has anyone steamed the costume yet?" She said it to the seamstress. She said it to me. She said it to anyone who happened to be nearby, that I convinced myself it was nothing more than pre-wedding nerves, that I'd helped dress more than 400 brides, that I knew the difference between ordinary anxiety and genuine hesitation. But this was my own sister. Sometimes it's easier to ignore the truth when it's happening inside your own family. That was my mistake. And it was the last mistake I ever made without paying a price point 3 weeks before the wedding. I personally added the marriage license appointment to the calendar. Of course, I did that in our county. Both people have to appear together at probate court, show their photo identification, and sign the paperwork under oath. There isn't anything romantic about it. It's simply another legal step, which meant it became my responsibility. Brooke canceled the first appointment because of a nail salon visit. The second appointment came and went without her showing up at all. Grant waited outside the courthouse for 40 minutes. Eventually, he got back his truck and drove when I confronted Brooke about missing the appointment. She simply waved her phone in front of me and said the courthouse would still be there next week. I reminded her that the wedding was only 16 days away and getting the marriage license would take no more than a lunch break. That MY mother overheard me as always. She immediately took Brooke's side. She said, word for word, that they could handle the paperwork during the wedding weekend. I told her that wasn't how it worked. We were standing in the stockroom while I was carrying an armful of crinoline dot. I explained that the marriage license had to be issued before the ceremony. Both people had to appear in person. Both names had to be on the application. Both signatures had to be there. Otherwise, everything that happened beneath those beautiful string lights would mean absolutely nothing. MY mother looked at me the same way she looked at a crooked ham that refused to cooperate. Then she dismissed the conversation by saying, "Details are your department." So I scheduled the appointment for a third time and circled the date in bright red. That same Thursday afternoon, I was driving the alteration van back from Marion when I spotted my sister outside a bar called the Copper Key. She was laughing as she climbed into a gray sedan. The man opened the passenger door for her. Wasn't Grant, I'm not proud of what I did next, but if I had to make the same choice again, I'd do it without hesitation. The following evening, I returned to Copper Key. I ordered a club soda and sat where I could observe the bartender. His name tag read Dominic. He looked to be around 30 years old. He had the kind of charm that looked impressive at first glance but felt borrowed. Like a rented tuxedo, in the 20 minutes I sat there, I heard him call 3 different women sweetheart. Working for lawyers had taught me how to ask questions without attracting attention. Little by little, I learned what I needed to know. Dominic played guitar in a cover band. He bartended 4 nights each week. And according to people who knew him, he'd been seeing a blonde woman from Millbrook for about 5 months, 0.5 months. That MY's sister had been wearing Grant's engagement ring for almost a year. I drove straight to Brooke's apartment. I didn't soften my words that I told her I had seen the gray sedan, that I told her I had met the bartender, and I reminded her that the wedding was only 15 days away. She didn't blush. She didn't panic. She simply said Dominic was an old friend and accused me of being jealous. Then she tilted her head and spoke the sentence she'd probably been saving since we were children. "If you tell anyone, I'll tell Mom you're making the whole thing up because you can't stand that it's my turn again." Then she asked, "Who do you think she'll believe?" I already knew the answer. 32 years of experience had taught me exactly who my mother would choose, as I did the only useful thing I could. That night, I sent Brooke a single text message, and I kept a screenshot of it. Because paperwork is something I trust, the message said, "Whatever this is, ended before Saturday." She read it at 11:14 that night. She never replied. 13 days later. She disappeared on the Thursday before the wedding. My mother hosted a family dinner in the apartment above the bridal shop. She served roast chicken, and every place at the table had a printed wedding itinerary. Brooke texted that she was getting a facial and would arrive late by 9 o'clock. She still wasn't answering her phone at by 10. My mother told me to check Brooke's apartment. Checking on everyone had somehow become my responsibility, too. The spare key was still hidden beneath the welcome mat, exactly where it had always been. When I stepped inside, I immediately noticed that half the closet was empty. Her suitcase was gone. Her makeup case was gone. Only the $10,000 wedding gown remained, standing alone on the dress form in the corner, like someone waiting for a bus that had already left. A note was sitting on the kitchen counter. Just one sentence written in Brooke's large, looping handwriting. "Don't wait for me. I'm sorry. Tell Grant it was never real." I stood there reading those words again and again, 0.4 times. Then I called my mother, and this is the part that still unsettles me. She didn't cry. She never asked where Brooke had gone. She didn't ask whether her daughter was safe. She didn't wonder what had gone wrong. There was only silence, about 10 long seconds, and through that silence, I could almost hear her calculating something in her mind. Finally, she spoke in the polished customer service voice she always used inside the showroom. "Bring the note, and don't tell your father yet." When I returned to the apartment above the bridal shop, my mother was standing beneath the brightest lamp in the room with her arms folded across her chest. She looked me over slowly, from my shoulders to my waist down to the hem of my skirt. For a moment, I couldn't understand that look. Then my stomach understood before my mind did. She wasn't looking at me like her daughter. She was examining me the way she inspected a wedding dress. She explained her plan as calmly as if she were assigning another task at the shop. I would wear Brooke's wedding gown. I would also wear cathedral veil, the heavy one that hid most of the bride's face. Everyone in town would be told that Brooke had laryngitis. They would say she cried so many happy tears that her voice was gone, and her doctor had instructed her to whisper. According to my mother, it only had to last for a short time. She insisted Brooke would come home within a week after bartender lost his appeal and his money. Then, she said, everything could quietly return to normal as though nothing had happened. I refuse immediately, and I want that part remembered exactly as it happened because my family tells this story differently. Standing in my mother's kitchen, I looked her in the eye and said, "No, absolutely not. It's insane. It's cruel. And I'm not doing that to Grant." My mother rarely needed to raise her voice. She was far more dangerous when she spoke softly. Without saying another word, she opened her purse and placed a folded letter on the kitchen table. IT carried the bank's letterhead, so I read through it. Certain words jumped out at me. Demand. Cure period $180,000 30 days. Then I realized the truth. The loan had already been in default for 4 months. She hadn't told anyone. Not even my father. If the wedding fell apart, the business partnership would collapse. The promised investment would disappear, and the bank would seize the only valuable collateral they had. Grandma Ruth's house, and my mother looked directly at me. Do you want Grandma Ruth to lose her home? Do you want to explain to that old woman why the bank took away her kitchen? Then she gave me her answer. So save it. It's only 1 weekend, Tara. Just sign the papers. Smile. He'll never know. I stood there holding that demand letter at that moment. I finally understood the math my family had been doing my entire life, that my mother had 2 daughters. One of them ran away. The other stayed behind to fix everything. That I drove home to Grandma Ruth's house and sat in the driveway until the porch light switched itself off. For the first time, I wasn't thinking like someone who worked in a bridal shop, that I was thinking about the law. Everything came down to one word. Sign. That single word carried consequences if my mother meant signing the guest book, signing thank you cards, smiling to the reception. That would simply be a performance, dishonest perhaps, but still legal. If she meant signing a marriage license, a government document, using someone else's identity, that would be a felony. The kind of crime that could destroy a career like mine before lunchtime. For 9 years, I'd watched lives fall apart over a single signature in conference rooms. I reminded myself of one thing. While sitting alone in that driveway and amount of debt, no foreclosure, no threat against the house, would ever make me place my pen on a state document pretending to be my sister. That was a line I drew, and I never crossed it. Even then, I still believed the easiest solution was for Brooke to come home. I called her again, straight to voicemail, just like every time before. Her phone stayed silent for 9 more days. By the time it finally came back on, everything had already changed. Only one. Questions still mattered. My mother kept insisting the paperwork could be handled later. But she clearly didn't understand how the law worked. And her misunderstanding might be the only thing that could save all of us, because no one can forge a marriage license that doesn't exist. Before I even considered stepping into that wedding gown, I needed the answer to one simple question. Did a valid marriage license for Saturday actually exist? I decided I would find out first thing Friday morning. But before Friday arrived, I walked past my grandmother's bedroom. Her lamp was still glowing. Grandma Ruth Hollis was 84 years old. Her mind was as sharp as a brand new sewing pin, and she never needed a hearing aid whenever conversation truly mattered. She was sitting upright in bed, working on a crossword puzzle. The moment she looked at my face, I told her everything. About Brooke's empty closet, the note she left behind, my mother's ridiculous story about laryngitis, the wedding gown waiting on its mannequin, and the bank letter that placed her own house at risk. Grandma Ruth listened without interrupting. Older women have a way of hearing bad news without flinching. By their age, they've already survived every kind of heartbreak more than once. When I finished speaking, she sat quietly for a moment. Then she said something I've carried with me ever since. Your mother sold this town a wedding years ago. Now she's renting them a bride. The truth doesn't need a veil, Tara. It never has. I sat on the edge of her quilt and spoke my boundaries out loud so they couldn't be ignored. I was willing to stand at the altar if doing so bought us enough time to protect her home while I dealt with the real problem. But there was one thing I would never do. I would not sign a single document, not with my own name, not with Brooks. And before anyone placed a pen anywhere near a marriage license, Grant Callahan would hear the truth directly from me, no matter what it cost the bridal shop, no matter what it cost me personally. Grandma Ruth gave a slow nod, almost like a judge approving the terms of an agreement. Then she squeezed my hand and smiled. Get some sleep? Liars sleep late. Honest women have work to do. She was right. The only errand that mattered had nothing to do with flowers, decorations, or weddings. The county records office opened at 8 o'clock. At exactly 8:02 Friday morning, I was standing at the probate court counter, wearing my work blazer. After 9 years in a law office, I knew exactly which window to walk to and exactly which request form I needed. I asked the clerk to search for any marriage license application filed under the names Callahan or Sinclair. The deputy clerk, a woman named Dee who had seen me many times on legal business, ran the search. At my request, she checked it a second time. Nothing. No application. No marriage license. No record of any kind. Brooke had skipped the appointment twice. And no one had ever scheduled a third appointment because the bride had been too busy packing her suitcase. I paid the required fee and requested something most people never think to ask for, a certified letter confirming that no marriage license existed on file. It included the county seal, the deputy clerk's signature, and that day's official date. She looked at me with a puzzled expression. Most people came there looking for proof that something existed. I was asking for proof that it didn't. I simply told her, that's exactly the point. I walked out of the courthouse holding that certified letter and finally allowed its meaning to sink in. Whatever happened on Saturday, no legal marriage could take place. Under the laws of the state of Ohio, there was no marriage license. Without a license, there could be no legal wedding, no forged paperwork, no felony. No matter what my mother staged beneath those string lights, the ceremony would be nothing more than a performance, an expensive performance, a cruel performance, a beautifully catered performance. Part of me felt an enormous sense of relief. The rest of me suddenly understood my mother's plan. She wasn't preparing to commit a crime. She was preparing to sell the town another illusion, exactly the way she had been selling weddings for the past 34 years. There was only one person left who deserved to know the truth, Grant. I drove straight to his hotel, but I never made it past the lobby. My mother was already standing beside the elevators wearing her best coat. She wasn't surprised to see me. That's the detail I've never been able to forget. She had been waiting there for 20 minutes. She knew exactly what I would do, because she knew me the same way a master tailor knows a pattern they've cut 100 times before. I raised you, she said as she gently took hold of my elbow, almost as if we were posing together for a photograph. I know your conscience as well as I know my own hemline. She guided me quietly toward the corner of the lobby, past a bellhop and a bowl filled with green apples. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she dismantled my entire plan. If I went upstairs and told Grant the truth within the next 10 minutes, the wedding would end. The business partnership would disappear. The investment would vanish. The bridal shop would collapse. And once those 30 days expired, the bank would come for the home belonging to an 84-year-old woman living in a little blue house on Concord Street. Then my mother looked at me and asked softly, "Where will Ruth eat Christmas dinner, Tara? In whose kitchen?" I want to be completely honest about that moment, because I promised myself I would tell this story truthfully. I wasn't helpless. I was trapped, and those are two very different things. Being trapped means every door you try to open comes with a price, and every one of those prices has your grandmother's name written on it. I walked out of the hotel lobby without going upstairs. By the time I reached my car, I hated myself for leaving, but I still had one option left. The wedding binder contained every vendor's contact information. It also contained Grant's personal cell number, written there in my own handwriting. Sitting behind the steering wheel, I carefully typed the most important text message I'd ever written. "This is Tara. I need 10 minutes with you before tomorrow. It's about Brooke. It can't wait. I watched the typing indicator appear. 3 little dots. Then they disappeared. A reply finally arrived. But it wasn't from Grant. The message came from a phone number only 1 digit different from his. It was written in the polished tone of a professional assistant. Mr. Callahan is in closings all day and isn't available for personal calls. He asks that anything you need be discussed after the wedding. I promise. I sat there in the parking lot, reading those words again and again. Each time, they made me angrier. I promise. Someone was asking me to wait until after the wedding, while my sister had already crossed state lines with a bartender. Something about it felt wrong. The way a mislabeled wedding gown feels wrong before you can explain exactly why. But I'd spent my entire life accepting impossible instructions from people who never welcome questions. As much as I hate admitting it now, that feeling seemed normal to me then. The rehearsal that evening carried the same quiet sense that something wasn't right. Grant's old college friend Sam Elkins was leading it. Years earlier, he'd become ordained just to officiate a friend's backyard wedding. He was relaxed, friendly, and wore reading glasses hanging from a chain around his neck. He guided everyone through a shortened version of the ceremony. That's when I noticed something. The way I always notice loose threads. No full names appeared anywhere in the script. It simply asked, "Do you take this woman? Do you take this man?" The bride's role could have belonged to anyone. Looking back, that was probably the entire point. Then there was Grant himself. He greeted people with handshakes, covered his emotions behind polite smiles, laughed whenever someone joked about the veil. He was as calm as a quiet lake at sunrise. That wasn't normal. I'd spent years watching nervous grooms sweat their way through rehearsal dinners. Grant moved differently, like a man calmly reviewing a contract he'd already accepted. I stood in the doorway of the barn, watching him laugh at something Sam had said. Deep inside me, a cold little voice whispered that someone else was controlling this wedding. I told myself I was simply exhausted. I was wrong. On Saturday morning, before the hairstylist arrived, I locked myself in my room and did 2 things. The first task had actually begun at 2 o'clock that morning. Kneeling on Grandma Ruth's bedroom floor with sewing pins between my lips, I carefully altered my sister's $10,000 wedding gown. I took in the waist, let out the hem, 1 stitch after another. I reshaped the dress until it fit me instead of Brooke. If you ever wanted a picture of what my life had always been, there it was, changing myself to fit someone else's place. The second thing took less than a minute, but it mattered far more. I took the certified letter from the probate court, the one carrying the county seal, Deputy Clerk D's signature, and the official confirmation that no marriage license existed on file. I folded it carefully into a small square, the kind of careful folds you make when your hands won't stop shaking. Then I slipped it inside the little blue clutch that matched the wedding gown. 1 piece of paper against an entire wedding. That letter was my proof. Proof that whatever my mother planned to stage that day, nothing legal was taking place. No marriage would exist. No valid ceremony would happen. And no matter what anyone expected from me, the woman standing beneath that veil had not crossed the line she had promised herself she never would. I looked at myself in the mirror. I was wearing my sister's wedding dress, but I was still looking at my own face. Out loud, I made myself one final promise. Before that man even had the chance to pour himself a cup of coffee tonight, he would know the truth, every part of it, and I'd have the paperwork to prove it. Then the doorbell rang. It wasn't the sound of church bells. It was the car my mother had sent to pick me up. At that point, there was nothing left to do except wear the dress. The barn at Grant's Orchard had been arranged with 180 chairs. My mother had counted every guest from the Sinclair side twice. Then she quietly reduced the list until almost no one from our town remained. Immediate family only, she told everyone. So intimate, so modern, but it had nothing to do with intimacy. It had everything to do with the fact that too many people in Millbrook could recognize the difference between Brooke's walk and mine. The remaining seats were filled with Grant's guests, business partners, developers, county officials, people who had probably met Brooke only once, maybe at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. My mother greeted everyone at the entrance like the hostess of her own production. She repeated the same explanation over and over. Poor Brooke has laryngitis. Too many happy tears since Thursday. The doctor told her to save her voice for the vows. As it turned out, even the vows had been carefully simplified. I stood at the back of the barn with my father's arm supporting me. The heavy cathedral veil covered my face so completely that no one could clearly recognize me through it. Inside my head, I kept hearing my mother's words. Just sign, smile. He'll never know. My father's hands were trembling. Mine weren't. Even now, I can't fully explain why. Maybe it was because the certified letter was safely tucked inside the blue clutch, and Grandma Ruth was sitting in the second row, guarding that clutch as carefully as a mother hen protecting her nest. Then the music began. 180 people turned to look. Instead of meeting their eyes, I counted the apple blossoms decorating the wooden rafters as I slowly walked down the aisle. Then came the moment I'd feared ever since Thursday night. Grant reached up and gently lifted the veil. There was nothing left to hide behind. He studied my face. His eyes stayed on me just a little longer than ordinary politeness required. One full breath longer. Then he smiled. A calm, warm, completely natural smile. The smile of a man looking exactly at the person he expected to see. For one brief moment, I blamed the lighting. I remember thinking the lights inside the barn must be hiding something. Later, I realized the lights weren't the reason. After attending more than 400 weddings, you begin to notice the structure beneath all the flowers and decorations. You expect certain things. The bride and groom's full name spoken aloud. The officiant making a small joke about signing the marriage license before everyone disappears to celebrate. 2 witnesses being called forward. Someone producing a pen. That quiet moment of paperwork that legally makes the marriage official. Now listen carefully to what happened at mine. Sam Elkins never spoke a single last name. Not once. He simply asked, "Do you take this woman? Do you take this man?" He talked about patience, about orchards, about surviving late frosts. His words were warm and charming, like sitting on a front porch on a summer evening. Then we exchanged rings, shared a kiss, and the ceremony ended. Nothing was said that a court reporter could use to identify either of us. Most importantly, no paperwork ever appeared. I know because I was waiting for it every second. The way you hesitate in the dark when you're expecting another step that isn't there. As we walked back down the aisle, I kept expecting someone to guide us toward a signing table, a folder, a binder, a pen. I expected my mother to quietly whisper, "Sign, this time, for real." But nothing happened. There was no table, no folder, no pen. As the applause faded, I caught my mother's eye from across the barn. I expected her to look worried about the missing paperwork. Instead, she looked perfectly calm, satisfied, almost proud, like a theater producer watching opening night go exactly according to plan. That's when I realized something. She honestly believed the paperwork could simply be handled later. She thought that had always been the plan, that men never paid attention to legal details. But I had personally scheduled every marriage license appointment, and I knew something she didn't. There was nothing left to complete later. There was no paperwork waiting. There never had been. That left me with one question I couldn't stop thinking about throughout every wedding photograph. If my mother hadn't intentionally removed every legal signature from the ceremony, and I certainly hadn't, then who had? The reception moved with the precision of a machine someone else had perfectly organized. The receiving line was quietly canceled, the part where every guest would have stood close enough to notice the whispering bride. Grant's wedding planner, a woman wearing a headset who carried herself with military precision, simply announced there were timeline adjustments. The number of speeches was also reduced. 5 planned toasts became only 1. Sam Elkins gave a short, light-hearted speech, and just like the ceremony, he carefully avoided mentioning anyone's full name. The first dance lasted only 90 seconds. We were told the band was running behind schedule, but nothing about the band suggested they were behind. They looked exactly like musicians following a carefully planned set of instructions. I drifted through the reception hidden behind my so-called laryngitis, smiling, shaking hands, whispering, "Thank you," so many times that the words eventually lost all meaning. Meanwhile, the wedding planner, the woman with the military posture and the headset, stayed one step ahead of every situation that might have exposed me. Before I even realized something could go wrong, she had already smoothed it over. By the time we reached the cake cutting, I had stopped believing my mother was the one controlling the day. Someone else was running this wedding. Across the edge of the dance floor, I watched my mother corner Colleen Boone, Grant's attorney. Colleen was a silver-haired woman who drank club soda at parties and missed absolutely nothing. My mother's smile was brighter than ever. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I knew exactly what she was talking about. The partnership, the investment, how everything should now be nothing more than formality because we were all one family. Colleen listened patiently until my mother finished. Then she answered with only a few quiet words. No more than 4 or 5 seconds. After that, she calmly walked toward the bar. My mother's smile never disappeared, but it looked less certain, like a tent still standing while the wind pushed against it. I learned the reason the following Monday. The answer was simple. Paperwork first, money afterward. Close midnight, Grant found me standing beside the cake table. He leaned close beneath my veil and quietly said, "You must be exhausted. Let's go home." The word home settled heavily inside me. His truck carried the scent of cedar and fresh rain. We drove away from the orchard as the last taillights disappeared behind us. The string lights slowly faded into the distance. Neither of us spoke very much. I was grateful for the silence. The entire drive, I kept rehearsing what I needed to tell him. The little blue clutch rested in my lap beneath both hands. Inside, it was a certified letter from the courthouse, folded carefully, like a passport leading me back to my own identity. I arranged every sentence in my mind the same way I'd always arranged sewing pins, carefully, in the order that would cause the least pain. I'm not Brooke. No one legally got married today. I can prove it. My parents used me to protect their investment. I agreed to stand in the ceremony, but I never agreed to let the lie continue after the night. Here's the letter. Here's the whole truth. I repeated those words over and over between the orchard entrance and the porch of his farmhouse. Whatever happened afterward, whether he shouted, stayed completely silent, or called Colleen Boone before midnight, at least this time, the truth would come directly from me, 10 hours late, but spoken with my own voice, backed by my own evidence, under my own name. The farmhouse was warm, quiet, and simple. Nothing inside felt staged. Nothing resembled a showroom, just solid wood, a comfortable home. Grant hung his jacket on a wall hook, like someone who genuinely enjoyed living alone. Without asking, he filled a kettle and put water on to boil. Then he set out 2 mugs. That small act of kindness almost broke me. I placed a blue clutch on the kitchen table, opened the clasp, took the deepest breath I'd managed all day. Then I finally spoke. "Grant." I never got any farther. He turned toward me as calmly as a peaceful Sunday morning. Then he said, "Actually, there's something you need to know." Every sentence I had rehearsed collapsed in an instant. It felt as though I'd dropped them onto the clean kitchen floor, where they shattered before I could speak. Then he looked directly at me. Not at Brooke. At me. "Tara." He said my name gently, the way someone speaks across a desk after they've already opened the file. "I know. I've known since Friday morning. Honestly, I've suspected it even longer than that." Behind him, the kettle began making its quiet, ticking sounds. Neither of us moved. I'd imagined this conversation hundreds of times. In every version, I was the one carrying the truth toward him like a lantern in the dark. Not once had I imagined arriving only to discover that someone else had already turned on the lights. Grant quietly pulled out a chair at the kitchen table for me. Then he did something that explained more about the previous 6 months than any speech ever could. He opened the drawer beneath the fruit bowl, reached inside, and placed a thick craft envelope on the table in front of me. Its corners were worn from being handled many times. The envelope looked like something that had been carried around for a long time. The corners were worn from being opened and read over and over again. There was no dramatic performance, no furious groom, no shouting, just that thick envelope resting between us on the table like a silent third guest. "You came here to tell me the truth," Grant said quietly. "I watched you rehearsing it the entire drive. Your lips were moving. So before you tell me everything, you should know what I already have." He gently pushed the envelope toward me. "It's yours. Open it." I looked down at my own hands. My fingers were still wrapped tightly around the little blue clutch. Inside, it was my folded courthouse letter. The single piece of paper I believed could stand against everything that had happened that day. But somehow, the envelope in front of me felt much heavier. I lifted the flap. Grant walked over and turned off the kettle. He didn't pour the tea. Instead, he quietly sat across from me and waited with the patience of winter while I spread the contents across the table. The first pages were financial spreadsheets. Grant's company routinely performed background checks on anyone requesting a business partnership. It was standard procedure. The signed authorization had been hidden inside my mother's own paperwork. Months earlier, the report on Sinclair Bridal had revealed 2 liens and an active default connected to the $180,000 loan. Then I found a report on Brooke. She carried $62,000 in personal debt, credit cards, personal loans. None of it had ever been mentioned while my mother was asking Grant to invest $150,000 into the family business. Beneath the financial reports were photographs. Brooke outside the Copper Key. Brooke climbing into the gray sedan. Brooke and Dominic together at a gas station in Kentucky on Thursday night. Every photograph carried a timestamp. In one picture, Dominic's hand rested against her neck while her face glowed with happiness. There was also a private investigator's report. It had been commissioned weeks earlier. The reason was written clearly. Following the second mismarriage license appointment and continued behavioral inconsistencies. Even copies of the courthouse records were included. Both canceled appointments. Neatly documented. Just like perfect stitching. There was never a marriage license, Tara. Grant said quietly, "You know that better than anyone." Then he looked directly at me. "I saw you go into the records office Friday morning. I was across the street getting coffee. I watched you come out carrying that letter, as if it were something alive." The heat rushed into my face beneath layers of bridal makeup. He had seen me. He knew exactly what I had gone there to check. And he understood why it mattered. Yet despite knowing all of that, he had still stood beside me beneath those string lights, in front of 180 guests. Knowing the woman beside him wasn't Brooke, I slowly pushed the photographs aside. Only one question remained. The same question I had carried with me all the way to his front porch. "Then why did you stand at that altar?" Grant answered carefully. He gave me the practical explanation first, and he made it clear that it was only the business answer. If I'd canceled less than 24 hours before the ceremony, we would have lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in deposits. The vendors had already been paid. Guests had already flown in. Colleen Boone wanted your family's actions documented in front of witnesses before I officially walked away from the partnership. People willing to rent you a bride are also willing to sue you over a business deal. Sam knew the truth by Friday afternoon. That's why no legal names were spoken. And that's why no paperwork ever appeared. He paused. Those are the reasons I'd given a boardroom. Now here's the real one. For a long moment, he looked down at the table. Then his eyes met mine. The seating chart. My coffee order. The button you sewed back onto my jacket during the tasting. For minutes, thread from your purse. For 6 months, every thoughtful thing, every responsible thing, every competent thing connected to this engagement was done by the sister standing quietly in the background, and every bit of credit drifted to the one who spent the day looking at her phone. He continued softly. Brooke skipped the courthouse twice. You drove here in the rain trying to save a wedding that wasn't even yours. By Friday, when your mother called claiming Brooke had laryngitis, I already knew Brooke was in Kentucky, and I understood exactly what your family was about to do to you. I could have stopped everything with a single phone call. I didn't, Because Saturday was the only day your family was ever going to let me stand beside you. He held my gaze without looking away. And I'm not sorry. I knew exactly whose hand I was holding. Before I could say anything, Grant spoke again. The hotel lobby, he said. The front desk told me that the older Miss Sinclair had come looking for me. He continued calmly. And that message you received telling you to wait until after the wedding, that was from me. I needed one more day. One more day to watch your family show me exactly who they were. I got my answer. And you ended up being used by both sides. I want to be honest about what happened next. I didn't fall apart. When you spent 32 years being manipulated, you learn to recognize the feeling of someone trying to guide your life, even when they're gentle about it. I stood up from the table and looked him straight in the eye. You watched my family place me on that stage under someone else's name. You let it happen because it fit your own plan. My mother wanted me silent. You wanted me standing in the spotlight. So tell me, how is that any different? Grant didn't defend himself. He didn't argue. He didn't interrupt. Looking back, that was the first thing he did right that entire night. You're right, he said, except for one difference. Your mother believed you'd stay silent forever. I believed you'd come to my door tonight. Tell me the truth without being forced. And bring the proof with you. He nodded toward the little blue clutch resting on the table. You had barely started speaking before I interrupted. I already knew I had won that bet. Then he explained what he was offering. There were no dramatic speeches, no grand declarations, no attempts to make the moment feel romantic, just practical choices. The guest room in his farmhouse would be mine for as long as I needed it. No expectations, no conditions, no strings attached. Colleen Boone would represent me, not my family. Beginning Monday, everything could be brought to an end quietly. There was no legal marriage to dissolve, because no legal marriage had ever existed. The public announcements would be handled professionally. He would shield me from as much gossip as possible. Then he carefully mentioned the loan, the bank, the debt. He offered to take care of it all. I stopped him before he could finish. Don't solve my problems with money. I looked at him and said, people have been attaching a price tag to my family's mistakes ever since I was 14. I've seen what those debts do to the people who carry them. My grandmother will hear the truth from me, and my family is my responsibility to face. Grant studied me quietly for a long moment. Then he gave a single nod, as though the terms had been accepted. At 6 o'clock the next morning, my phone rang. It was Brooke. She was crying before I even answered, not the polished tears she could produce when people were watching. These were broken, uneven, breathless sobs. For one brief moment, I forgot everything. I was simply her older sister again. Then she started talking, and that moment disappeared. Dominic's band had supposedly been heading toward Nashville. That had been the dream. But somewhere outside the city, Dominic casually asked when her share of the wedding money would arrive. He had assumed she would be bringing a large family payout with her. When Brooke admitted there wasn't any money, that she left the supposed payout standing at the altar back in Ohio, everything changed. Dominic went quiet. Before sunrise, he was gone. The gray sedan, the guitar, and Dominic himself had disappeared from the motel parking lot. She had run away with a man who only wanted money. That never existed. I probably would have appreciated the irony if she had asked me even once how I was doing. She never did. Instead, she said, "You have to fix this. You already wore the dress, Tara. Just keep wearing it until the money comes through. Then I'll come home, and we'll sort everything out." Sort everything out. She truly was my mother's daughter. Every single stitch of her. By noon, my mother had already recovered, like a general who had lost one battle, but refused to admit the war was over. She announced a family meeting for 4 o'clock that afternoon, at Grandma Ruth's house. Choosing that location wasn't an accident. She wanted the house itself standing beside her argument. Every room, every porch board, every family memory, helping make her case. Before the meeting, I opened the drawer of my desk and removed the folder I had stored there, the same folder containing every copy of the loan documents. At 1 o'clock, my mother called to give me instructions before the meeting. In her mind, I was still working for the family, and I always would be. Instead of holding the phone to my ear, I placed it on speaker and set it in the middle of Grandma Ruth's kitchen table. Then I stayed completely silent. Working as a paralegal had taught me something important. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can give a person is enough silence for them to reveal themselves. She filled the silence herself. Her plan unfolded as smoothly as satin. According to her, I would remain Mrs. Callahan until the end of the financial quarter, just long enough for the $150,000 investment to arrive and for the partnership papers to be signed. After that, once Brooke had rested and was, in my mother's words, presentable again, they would simply manage the transition. That was the exact phrase she used. Then Brooke would resume her position. Her words again. She spoke as if a marriage were nothing more than a shift change at a cash register. I calmly asked one question. How exactly do two sisters exchange a husband on legal paperwork? She let out a tired sigh, as though I was the one making things difficult. We'll sort the paperwork out later, she replied. Men never read the fine print. That single sentence captured everything about my mother. To her, paperwork could always wait. People could always be replaced. And the performance always came first. She kept talking for another 11 minutes. She went over the investment, the bank, the deadline, the laryngitis story, how long they could realistically keep it going, which relatives were already suspicious, and what explanation each of them had been given. Every now and then I simply answered, "Emitam," at exactly the moment she expected. Meanwhile, I wrote down every time, every number, and every detail on the back of an old seed catalog. 9 years working as a paralegal had trained me well. When she finally ended the call, she sounded completely satisfied. She believed she had just given me instructions. What she had actually done was hand me Exhibit A. At 2 o'clock, I spread 14 months' worth of photocopied documents across Grandma Ruth's kitchen table. The guarantee bearing her trembling signature, the disclosure forms no one had properly explained to her, the payment schedule, the default notices my mother had hidden, and finally, the bank's demand letter, its 30-day deadline counting steadily down. Grandma Ruth quietly put on her reading glasses. Then she examined each page one by one. Her fingertips rested gently on every document, almost as if she were touching headstones. I looked at her and spoke softly. 14 months ago, you told me you couldn't take your own daughter to court. I respected that, but I've regretted staying silent ever since. I'm not asking you to punish Mom. I'm asking you to stop paying for her performance. She didn't answer immediately. Outside, the sound of a lawnmower drifted back and forth through the open window. Finally, she removed her glasses, folded them carefully, then looked at me. The truth doesn't need a veil. Call the lawyer. Give her the documents. Within 4 minutes, I had Mary Ann Pell on the phone. I'd worked alongside her for years on elder financial abuse cases. I already knew the checklist by heart, and Ruth's situation fit it almost perfectly. An 84-year-old guarantor, no independent legal advice, signing away her home to secure her daughter's business loan, then being kept in the dark afterward. Mary Ann listened carefully. She asked Grandma Ruth 3 private questions while I stepped out of the room. When the conversation ended, she made her decision immediately. First thing Monday morning, she would personally file the case. She planned to challenge the guarantee, argue undue influence, and file a complaint that would force the bank to pause its collection process while reviewing every document again. Before 3 o'clock, I scanned every record and sent copies to Colleen Boone. I didn't want Grant's legal team to be caught off guard by anything. Then I walked into the kitchen, set out 5 coffee cups, not because my family deserved coffee, but because I needed my hands busy with something completely ordinary. At exactly 4 o'clock, my family walked into Grandma Ruth's living room expecting to find an obedient actress. Instead, they found a paralegal. They entered almost like a formation. My mother came in first, wearing the same tailored suit she always reserved for bank meetings. Her eyes swept across the room like a stage manager checking every angle before opening night. My father followed behind her. He carried a box of bakery cookies with both hands, the way someone carries flowers into a hospital room. Brooke entered last, still wearing sunglasses indoors. She wore her misery almost like another piece of clothing. Then my mother began arranging everyone, literally arranging them. She placed Brooke on the sofa, where the lighting was the most flattering. She positioned my father beside the window, and she seated herself in the old wingback chair, the chair that had always been the seat of authority in that house. Grandma Ruth quietly lowered herself into her rocking chair instead. She said nothing. Her cane stood planted firmly in front of her, like a flag that wasn't about to move. At my request, Grant Callahan waited outside on the front porch. The moment my mother saw him, confusion crossed her face. He wasn't stepping inside. He wasn't leaving either. He simply stood there with his hands tucked into his pockets, a quiet witness. Earlier that morning, he had asked if I wanted him in the meeting. I told him no. "I want you at the door," I said. "This is something I have to face myself." Just before I went inside, he gently stopped me on the porch. He spoke so quietly that only I could hear him. "It's already prepared," he said. "One signature. And by Wednesday, the bank is out of your life. Your grandmother's house is protected. Everything is taken care of. It's all for you. No conditions. Just say yes." I promised myself I would tell this story honestly. So I'll admit something. For a moment, I wanted to accept. The offer was so simple that it terrified me. Every problem waiting inside that living room could disappear before Wednesday. The debt, the bank, the fear, all gone. But I also understood the cost. It meant allowing someone else to rescue me with money. I looked through the screen door. Inside, my mother was straightening a lace doily that didn't need fixing. Then I looked back at Grant. "I know," I whispered. "That's exactly why I can't." I opened the door, walked into the living room, and took my seat among my family. My mother began speaking as if she were reading the minutes from a business meeting. "The family has agreed," she announced. I remember thinking how strange that sentence sounded. The family has agreed. Yet no one had actually been asked. She continued confidently. "The simplest solution is for Tara to remain Mrs. Callahan until the end of the quarter. Once the investment is completed, the bridal shop will recover. This house will be safe. And no one ever has to know what happened." She glanced toward Brooke. "She only needs time to recover. Then we'll manage the transition. As a family." She smoothed the wrinkles from her skirt before looking back at me. "It's only one season, Tara. You've spent years carrying this family without ever being asked. So, what difference does one more season make?" I let the old mantel clock tick through the silence. Then I asked the only question I had brought with me. "Nam, when did you stop seeing the difference between your daughters?" She immediately lifted her chin. "Don't be dramatic." I quietly shook my head. "This isn't about the dress. It isn't about costumes. You measured my body for Brooke's wedding gown, without hesitating for even a second. So tell me, when did we become interchangeable to you?" For just a brief moment, something inside her cracked, like an old seam finally giving way after decades. She turned her eyes toward the window before answering. Her voice was softer than I had ever heard inside that house. "You think I created this way of thinking? My own mother sold her wedding ring, so this town would see me walk down the aisle. She sold at Hartman's to pay for a wedding dress, a reception hall, and a wedding cake with pillars. Because where I grew up, a woman who couldn't become a bride was treated like she was nothing. I've spent my whole life paying for that wedding. For one long breath, everything else disappeared. The money, the business, the lies, the arguments. The room held only 2 women, and the lifelong price of living for appearances. Winning came with a price, and it collected that price one piece at a time. My mother gathered her purse, straightened her posture, and paused at the door. She didn't shout, which somehow made it worse. "Then you are no daughter of mine," she said evenly, as though I were a hem she decided wasn't worth fixing. 32 years of trying to earn a place at that woman's table ended in one flat sentence. My father stood frozen in the middle of the room, still holding the box of cookies. Then he spoke the only completely honest sentence I had ever heard him say. "Viv," he said quietly, "she's the only one of us who never lied to the man." My mother never turned around. Then my father, after finally speaking the truth, picked up his coat and followed her out anyway. 40 years of habit carried him to the car, and I realized that sometimes even the truth isn't enough to change a lifetime. Brooke lingered in the doorway, her sunglasses back on. "You always fixed everything," she said softly, more to the doorframe than to me. "I hated you for it. You know that." Then she was gone too, back to the apartment, then eventually to Florida, and whatever shiny new life came next. The screen door slammed. Car doors closed. The engine faded down Concord Street. Grandma Ruth's living room became so quiet I could hear a lawnmower humming 3 yards away, as if the rest of the world had simply continued with its Sunday. I sat down beside Ruth's rocking chair, just like I had when I was 7 years old. Only then did my hands begin to shake, the way they do after you've finally taken the pins out of your mouth. Ruth rested her hand gently on my head. The bank's 30-day deadline was still ticking. The difference now was that, come morning, the bank would be dealing with lawyers. My mother had no time left at all. Monday arrived with the calm precision of procedure. That's what I love about the law. It doesn't cry and it doesn't celebrate. It simply files. At 9:40 that morning, Mary Ann Pell filed a challenge to Ruth's guarantee along with the elder financial abuse complaint. By Thursday, confronted with an 84-year-old guarantor who had received no independent legal counsel and faced significant documentation issues, the bank suspended all collection efforts against Ruth's home pending review. Suspended isn't the same as saved, Mary Ann reminded us. That's the sort of sentence lawyers are paid to say. Still, she smiled when she said it. By spring, the guarantee was permanently released, and the debt returned to where it had always belonged, with the actual borrowers. That same Monday, Colleen Boone sent my parent a letter on heavyweight stationery. Every event from the previous week had been documented. Witnesses had been identified. The investment partnership was terminated in full. All contact with Grant Callahan's companies was to cease immediately. Provided that Ruth Hollis and Tara Sinclair were left entirely in peace, the file would remain a shield, not a sword. My mother had spent 34 years teaching the town to believe her version of every story. At last, she encountered a document she couldn't rewrite. The bridal shop lost both its rescue and its reputation in the same week. A month later, the display window that had once been filled with headless bridal mannequins carried a single sign: "Everything must go." I stood across Main Street with my keys in my hand and prepared to do the hardest small thing of my life. Nothing. I didn't call the landlord. I didn't balance the books won last weekend. I didn't try to fix it. Some seams aren't yours to sew. Then, one evening in April, Grant Callahan knocked on Ruth's front door. No flowers. No folder. He asked me one simple question. First date. No scripts. Nobody watching. Yes or no? I said yes. Then I made him earn the second yes. He did, slowly. That was the only way I was ever going to trust a man who could think 10 moves ahead. 6 months is enough time for a small town to wear a story smooth. Millbrook talked, of course. For a while, I was a sister who wore the dress, and women whose prom gowns I'd hemmed fell silent when I stepped into the coffee shop. Then a school board scandal arrived, and like every small town, Millbrook found something new to talk about. My mother stayed in town with my father, renting a small 2-bedroom apartment and taking in alterations. I'm told she still tells her version of the story at the salon, a version where she protected everyone, and I chose strangers over family. I no longer need her version to match mine, the force she spent her whole life serving, the one that measures a woman's worth by her wedding day and a family's worth by its storefront display. I didn't defeat it. It's still out there every Saturday, renting tuxedos and selling appearances. I simply took my name back out of its mouth. Brooke sends postcard from Florida every now and then. No return address. Just sunsets and promises of another new opportunity. I write back to the P.O. box she gave me years ago. My letters are short. They're kind, because she was built by the same factory that tried to build me. She just never had a roof. Grandma's house is free now. Her name, is the only one on the deed. And on a Tuesday morning in October at 9:15, in the small probate courtroom just 2 doors down from Dee's records window, I stood in a simple blue dress. No alterations, no disguise, no borrowed identity. It fit perfectly because it had been made for me. Both parties appeared in person, exactly as the law requires. Photo IDs on the counter. Ruth sat proudly in the front row, wearing her good coat. Sam Elkins stood beside Grant. Mary Ann Pell slipped away from a deposition just long enough to cry through the entire 4-minute ceremony. The clerk slid the marriage license across the counter. For the first time in my life, my hand didn't shake. Tara Ruth Sinclair signed exactly as herself. Only herself. Then Grant picked up the pen. He looked at me the same way he had when he first lifted that veil. One heartbeat longer than politeness. "I know exactly who I'm marrying," he said. "Today, that marriage license hangs in a frame above Ruth's mantel. The same place where for so long the bank's demand letter haunted my dreams. Some evenings I stand there with a cup of tea and read my own name like it's the first honest headline I've ever seen. The truth never needed a veil. It never did. It only needed someone willing to stop holding one up. If I could fold everything that year taught me into one sentence and press the crease sharp, it would be this. If your family only loves you when you're useful, that isn't love. It's convenience. And you are allowed at any age, without anyone's permission, to stop being convenient. Because the people who are truly meant to stay will always know exactly whose hand they're holding. That's my story. A borrowed veiled, a folded letter that a name finally signed, and why Mother always called the weekend I destroyed our family. Maybe that's what you believed when this story began. Now you've heard everything, so I'll leave the verdict to you. What I know is this. A little house on Concord Street still has its porch light glowing each evening. The woman who lived there got to keep both her home and her granddaughter. And I finally learned that saving yourself isn't the same as destroying your family. Sometimes it's the only honest thing left to do. If this story found you at the place where your family's script ended and your own life began, share it with someone who still feels trapped in a role they never chose. I'd also love to know where you're watching from tonight. So leave a comment below. And if stories about family betrayal, hidden truths, and finding the courage to reclaim your life speak to you, subscribe to Hidden Family Revenge. Because somewhere tonight, someone is still smiling to keep the peace, still signing away pieces of themselves, still carrying a burden that was never theirs. And maybe, just maybe, tonight is the night they finally stop. Thank you for staying with me. Good night.